Korean people are too smart. So the fact that Korea is the second smartest country in the world could be argued, but by IQ, it most certainly is the second smartest country in the world. There was some research behind it. I think Singapore and Hong Kong actually get #1 smartest countries in the world by IQ, and they both have an average of 108. And Korea has an average of 106, which makes it the second because those two are tied, and I can't remember. Some other country also has, I think Taiwan also has 106. So by any given standard of IQ, Korea is kind of the second smartest country in the world, even smarter than Japan and China and some other Asian countries. And America's actually got an average of 98, and America ends up being the ninth smartest, tied for ninth smartest country in the world. Now, I think because of this, Korea kind of has a big problem. I think this intelligence, especially this overall broad scoping average intelligence, can lead to a lot of sadness. There's this idea that I need to get out right now before I can go on with the video any further, which is people need mental exercise. People need to educate themselves just for the sake of educating themselves. Just makes people happier, makes people feel better, it makes people just better off when you are more educated, and not the kind of education you do to pass Sunung or pass some other standardized test or whatever the case may be. Now, if you can accept that as a fact, then it's very easy to show why Korean people's intelligence actually ends up being kind of a hindrance. Now, I think in Korea, this idea of education for the sake of education, this idea of education just because it makes you feel better as a person, makes you feel, I'm reluctant to say happier, but it just makes you have a better life. It's not a secret to Korean people. It's not that Korean people have never heard about this and it's like, whoa, what a crazy Western ideal that we've never come across before in our lives. It's just that Korean people end up being, I think, too realistic in this way. In many of my videos, I've praised Korean people for being very realistic, and sometimes I think of Americans as too idealistic, where we run around telling kids, you could be an astronaut if you want, you could be a baseball player, you could be a basketball player. Look, as smart and as awesome as I think I am, I don't think I can be an astronaut. Astronauts have like 2 PhDs, and they're also in great physical shape, and they're just the super smartest, most amazing people ever, and I just couldn't do it. Even if I thought I wanted to at the age of 5, like I just couldn't do it. And Korean people are very quick, maybe sometimes too quick, to be very realistic and say like, that's not a path for you. Don't aim for that. And I've often praised Korean society for doing that. The problem is that realism leads a lot of times to this hyper competition that Korean people have, especially in high school, but all throughout life. This hyper competition of, if I'm not putting every hour, every minute, every second into study, into work, somebody else is going to do more, and they're going to get ahead of me in life, and they're going to be better off than I am. And of course, nowhere is this more obvious in the Korean system than in high school, where you have high school teachers who I'm sure would love, this is where the realism comes in. There's high school teachers who I'm sure would love to give their students a very broad, open-minded education and teach them things that weren't just for passing Sunung or weren't just passing whatever test they're teaching to, and it was just education for the sake of education. Because everyone knows, it's not just a Western thing, everyone knows it's a good thing. The thing is, in Korea, you guys are stuck in this hyper competition. So any minute spent on education for the sake of education is a minute you lost studying for Sunung. And if you lost that minute and another person didn't lose that minute, didn't waste their time on education for the sake of education, then they're going to do better and they're going to get ahead of you, and then you're going to be worse off. And maybe there's this idea that, okay, well, in high school, I've had this, I ask my Korean friends, when should a child be allowed to date? And they'll tell me either in middle school or in college, but not in high school. Because in high school, you're supposed to be spending every moment of time studying Sunung, making sure you can do well on Sunung so you can get a good score and have a good college and have a good life. So then they kind of, what we say in English is pass the buck off to, okay, well, in college, you can open your mind a little bit more and do this education for the sake of education. which I guess is kind of true, but I don't know how much professors at universities, even in America, university professors are very separate and they're just giving lectures and they're just grading papers and they're not there to kind of give you this guidance about how to educate yourself for the sake of education, or they don't go much into the importance of it because they've got a different job at that point. They have to teach you this material and you have to learn that material. And in America, you're thought of as an adult by the time you're in college. So if you want to do education for the sake of education, you kind of do it by yourself. And there's some understanding that maybe, or probably, the American student had some exposure to this idea when they were in high school. I asked my Korean friends, I love to ask this question to my Korean friends. Who was your favorite teacher in high school? And the reaction I get from Korean people is usually kind of confused. They're like, what do you mean my favorite? Like, who was the best, or who was the easiest, or what? For Americans, it's very quick. I can tell you right now, for me, it was like Mr. Kim, Mr. Ferris, Mr. Cannon. Those guys were great for me, especially Mr. Ferris. And his idea was, you know, you're supposed to have education for the sake of education. He's not just teaching us things so we can pass the SATs. And I feel like in Korea, there's very little of that because of this hyper competition and this hyper realism, which is if we spend any time doing that, we're taking time away from the really useful thing, which is passing sunung. And then you go into college and no professors are really getting on you about you should be educated for the sake of education. And then you go to work and then you're at work and you go, well, I'd like to educate myself for the sake of education so I can better myself. And then you're like, well, wait. I gotta get work done. I work 12 hours a day. There ain't no time for education for the sake of education. And then you get married and you're even more locked down because your spouse is also working 12 hours a week and you're trying to be close with them and spend time with them and you're trying to work 12 hours a day and you're messed up. And then you have kids and then the busyness just keeps piling on. And this idea of education for the sake of education gets left behind altogether until you're just stuck in that life of work, raise your kids, or you know, just study so you can pass sunung, or just study so you can pass TOEIC or TOEFL, or the doctor exam, or the gongmuwon exam, or whatever the hell it is, and you're just stuck in this trap of there's no time for education for the sake of education. There's only time for education for real study, for passing tests and the such. So this is not just a Korean thing. It's just something that's more prevalent in Korea. In America, we have this to some degree. And in Korea, there's a lot more standardized tests, and education has a much bigger bearing on the outcome of your life. So it gets even worse in Korea. Furthermore, Korean people are too smart. So when you think about it, imagine you have two people. One guy has an IQ of 120, the other guy has an IQ of 80, and neither of them have done this education for the sake of being educated. Both of them are just, you know, when they're done with the work, staring at their cell phones and just playing, I don't know, Flappy Bird, whatever the hell it is, right? And neither of them are doing education for the sake of education. And both of them are worse off for it. But who does it affect more? That lack of education for the sake of education. Who does it affect more? The person who has a 120 IQ or the person who has an 80 IQ? I think it's pretty obvious to see that the person who has a 120 IQ, he's much worse off for not doing education for the sake of education because he's smarter. And that's the other thing that kicks Korea in the butt, which is Korean people are smarter than Americans by, on average, a whole 10 IQ points. So we also live this life a lot. There's many people in America who are not educating themselves for the sake of education. Don't get me wrong and let me tell you that, oh no, it's just in Korea. It's all over the world. And I explained a little bit about this competition and realism that makes it maybe a little bit more in Korea than it is in America. But then on top of that, I think it affects Korean people more because Korean people are smarter than Americans. So the main point of this video is we have this problem and it's in the world, which is very few people are doing education for the sake of education to enlighten themselves and to be better off because of it. But the two extra problems in Korea is a lot of Korean society is pushing towards being very realistic about life and knowing that there's no time for education for the sake of education. And number two, Korean people are smarter than at least Americans and smarter than most other people in the world because they have the second highest IQ on average. And because they're so much smarter, this lack of education for the sake of education ends up hurting Korean people more than it does people from other countries. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you hate this video, give it a thumbs down. If you love me or hate me, hit the subscribe button. Remember, these videos come out every Friday at 7 p.m. So it's after 7 p.m. and it's a Friday. One of these videos comes out and you should check it out. And of course, please remember, have a super most awesome day.
창화 그리고 김유리 덕분에 저는 이런 영상을 만들 수 있습니다.
여러분의 지원 덕분에 이번 영상을 제작할 수 있었습니다.